Number 1.
Karen disappeared from Tucson, Arizona on January 11, 1996. She was seen roller skating and playing with her younger sister and some friends during the evening hours, and was last reportedly seen when she returned to her apartment to return her skates, and then went back out to play. She was never seen or heard from again. Karen was discovered as missing when her mother called her inside for dinner at 6:30 p.m. She was immediately reported missing. She was apparently sighted walking out of the apartment's courtyard where she was playing at the time. None of her playmates saw or witnesses her disappearance and heard no sounds associated with a struggle. Investigators believe Karen was abducted by a non-family member. It's possible that she was taken by an unidentified man seen in the area at the time of her presumed abduction. He is described as a Hispanic or Caucasian male with light brown colored hair and green hazel eyes. He was approximately 30 to 46 years old in 1996 and stood at 5'63" to 5'83" and weighed about 170 pounds at the time. It's possible he had facial hair or a mustache as well. Investigators believe this man is also responsible for the 1994 abduction, rape, and murder of Esther Lizette Gallas. She was 6 years old when she was abducted from outside of her apartment in Tucson on December 20, 1994. She was found under a mattress in a ditch about a kilometer away from her home. She was beaten to death. Her murderer remains unidentified. The two girls were both abducted under very similar circumstances, and both vanished outside of their apartments on the south side of Tucson. They both disappeared at approximately 6:30 p.m. and during the holiday season. They were both apparently wearing similar outfits when they were kidnapped. Investigators have also named Rodolfo Cedeno Morales as a possible suspect in Karen's presumed abduction. He resided in the same apartment complex as Karen did in 1996. He is currently serving a prison sentence for the kidnappings and sexual assaults of 5 girls from the Tucson area. All the victims were Hispanic and were aged between 5 and 9 years of age. They were abducted in between the years of 1993 and 1994. Morales has not been charged with Karen's abduction, and his wife even gave him an alibi for the time that Karen's supposed abduction took place. Investigators are unsure of who actually abducted the child, but believe it was the work of someone she didn't know or wasn't related to. Her family members were all cleared as suspects in the initial stages of her disappearance. Her father was known to be in Mexico at the time, and her mother was also a native of Mexico. At the time of her disappearance, Karen enjoyed roller skating and playing Nintendo games. She was a first-grade student at Elvira Elementary School and was learning to read, write, and sing when she disappeared. She has never been found and her abduction remains unsolved.
Number 2.
Brian was last seen in Salem, Oregon on January 12, 1975. He attended a party located on Southeast State Street near 25th and was accompanied by his sister and 2 friends. At some point during the party, his sister and one of their friends left the party for a little while. They said they last saw Brian listening to music with a friend called David at the time. They returned to the location of the party at some point after 2 a.m. They noticed that David was no longer in the house, and when they asked Brian about where he was, he said David had taken some LSD and was having a bad trip and left the house as a result. They urged Brian to go after him, and so he did. Brian followed David out of the house and proceeded to get inside of David's vehicle. His car was described as a turquoise-colored 1962 Volkswagen Bug with a black left front fender and the Oregon license plate number 7P3626. Brian was never seen or heard from again. Police arrested David at 5 a.m. after he broke into a car dealership and stole a car. He was caught speeding with it down State Street. He was still under the influence of the LSD at the time and said he thought he was in hell. He said he had no knowledge of Brian's whereabouts, and the vehicle he was last seen in has never been found. Investigators were also to respond to his case and initially presumed him to be a runaway. His family is adamant that he would not leave on his own accord. He was known to call his mother every time he felt he was going to be late. It's possible that he met with foul play, or that he and the vehicle plunged into the Detroit Lake. No evidence has been found in his case. At the time of his disappearance, Brian was described as a well-behaved and reliable teenager. He was known to experiment with drugs at the time, but he always kept in touch with his family. His disappearance remains unsolved.
Number 3.
Lenoria was last seen on July 20, 1995 in Tacoma, Washington. She was last known to be in the company of her great-aunt, Burleigh Williams. Williams initially told authorities that she and the child visited a convenience store and a car wash before heading to a Target store on South 23rd Street. She claimed that Lenoria disappeared while inside the store. She has never been seen or heard from again. Authorities believed Williams' statements until Target management produced the security camera videos from that day. Lenoria was not shown on any of them, but they did show Williams entering the store alone. No traces of Lenoria were found in the area. It should be noted that Williams has changed her story of how Lenoria disappeared at least 4 times. She at one point claimed that Lenoria was abducted from the Target store parking lot. Investigators found no evidence this statement was true. She also told them that the child simply wandered away from their residence, and additionally claimed 2 unidentified African American male subjects kidnapped the child near their residence. She then claimed that Lenoria was alive and living in an undisclosed location. It should be noted that it took an hour for Williams to report Lenoria's disappearance to the police. She apparently called her daughter at 8:47 a.m. and said she didn't know where Lenoria was and called the police at 9:42 a.m. to report the child missing. She had no explanation for why he waited so long to do so. Lenoria was in her great-aunt's custody at the time of her disappearance, and Williams was in the process of adopting her. She also ran a daycare center at the time. Her mother's legal rights for her were terminated by 1995, and the identity of her father is unclear. She never actually lived with her mother before her disappearance. Up until Lenoria was 2 years old, she lived with relatives in Spokane, Washington, whom her mother gave her to when she was born. Her mother lived in Arkansas at the time of her daughter's disappearance. She told investigators that she attempted to talk to Lenoria over the phone about 2 days before her reported disappearance, but Williams didn't permit it. Williams was placed under house arrest for 4 months after Lenoria's disappearance for failure to provide case information. Her daycare center was also shut down by the state. She has never been charged or implicated in her great-niece's disappearance, and her attorney maintains that her varying accounts of how the child vanished were due to constant pushing by law enforcement investigators. She has been called the primary suspect in the case. All of Lenoria's other relatives have been ruled out as suspects in her disappearance. They've considered the theory that Lenoria died from an accidental overdose as a result of the medication she was prescribed for her ADHD. The medicine norpinephrine is a tricyclic antidepressant. She has only been taking the medication for a few days prior to her disappearance, and it's not usually prescribed to young children. Norpinephrine is said to have a number of serious side effects which include skin rash, seizures, and even death, which can occur within the first few days of taking it. Investigators have stated there's no evidence to support this theory, however. Investigators have stated they believe foul play might have been involved in Lenoria's case. Her disappearance is currently classified as a non-family abduction, but investigators also believe she might be alive and in a location unknown to police. She lived in the 1900 block of South Sheridan Avenue in the Hilltop neighborhood area of Tacoma at the time of her disappearance. Lenoria's disappearance remains unsolved, but investigators keep her case open and hope to locate her.
Number 4.
Angelique was allegedly last seen in her home in Los Angeles, California on February 15, 1997. She hasn't been seen or heard from since that time. When police inquired as to where the child was, her mother, Shirley Ann James, refused to cooperate and failed to produce Angelique. Shirley was arrested after she failed to divulge where Angelique was in November of 1997, approximately 9 months after the child's disappearance. She did not comply with the police's demands for her to produce her, so she was arrested as a result. By that time, Angelique's 3 other sisters had been taken from her custody by child protection workers. She had 7 other children besides Angelique when the child vanished. In addition to her arrest, Shirley was charged with killing Angelique and 3 counts of child abuse and 2 counts of corporal injury to a child. They believe that the child was murdered at some point between December 15, 1996 and March 1, 1997. She pleaded not guilty to all charges in January of 1998. Shirley pleaded no contest to involuntary manslaughter in Angelique's presumed death. It should also be noted that one of Shirley's children, a 9-month-old infant girl, died from sudden infant death syndrome in 1992. Investigators reviewed the circumstances of her death after Angelique's disappearance, but found no evidence for charges to be filed. Shirley was sentenced to a maximum of 5 years in prison for her daughter's murder under the plea agreement. Investigators attempted to locate her body in late 1997. They brought cadaver dogs to her home's yard and searched. One of the cadaver dogs detected Angelique scent in the general area, but they found no evidence that she was there or anything that relates to her case. Some missing children's agencies may list her date of disappearance as March 1, 1997, and September 4, 1997. Investigators have been unable to produce Angelique's remains, but believe she was the victim of a homicide, and that foul play was involved.
Number 5.
Kirsten Hatfield was allegedly kidnapped from her home in Midwest City, Oklahoma on May 14, 1997. She was last seen at 11:30 p.m. on May 13 when her mother, Shannon Hayes, put the child to bed along with her 3-year-old sister. Kirsten shared a room with her sister at the time. Shannon went to their bedroom to check on them at some point between 6 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. and discovered that Kirsten was missing. It was discovered that there were small amounts of blood on the room's windowsill and was also present on the backyard's 6-foot-tall cyclone fence. Investigators also found Kirsten's ripped and bloodied underwear in the backyard. Investigators have found no trace of Kirsten since, and there was no evidence as to her whereabouts at the time. They initially believed someone close to Kirsten was responsible for her disappearance. They didn't think a stranger could get into the room and take Kirsten through the yard without a noise or struggle. Investigators questioned several persons who were close to Kirsten at the time of her abduction. They were all said to have failed their polygraph exams, but there was insufficient evidence to charge anyone in relation to her disappearance at the time. Shannon was involved with drugs at the time of her daughter's disappearance. She believed someone whom she knew and had ties to drug culture had taken her child. Shannon hopes her daughter was still alive until some time after her disappearance. She has never given up hope of knowing what happened to her daughter and where she is. On October 12, 2015, authorities made an arrest in Kirsten's 18-year-old disappearance. Anthony Joseph Palma was the suspect arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping in relation to her disappearance, after DNA evidence linked him to the crime. It was his DNA that matched the blood found on Kirsten's windowsill and on her underwear. Anthony lived 2 houses away from Kirsten at the time of her abduction, and was still living there when police arrested him. Investigators believe he stayed at the home after he committed the crime to conceal evidence of it, and possibly even the location of Kirsten's body. Investigators believe that Palma abducted Kirsten with intentions of sexually assaulting her. They believe she was killed shortly after her abduction. He was previously convicted of breaking into a woman's house and assaulting her in 1982. It's also possible that in the late 1970s or early 1980s that he sexually assaulted another young girl. The girl was the same age as Kirsten, and the crime was committed in a very similar fashion to Kirsten's abduction. He allegedly broke into the girl's home through her bedroom window and molested her. Police who were in the scene noticed his truck was near the home of the victim and knew the child. He was dating her older sister at the time of the attack. He was not charged in relation to that case due to lack of evidence. In 1998, a year after Kirsten went missing, a woman accused Palma of drugging and raping her. She allegedly lived with him at time of the supposed crime. He hasn't been charged in that case either. He went on trial for Kirsten's murder in October of 2017. Multiple witnesses testified against him and described how he sexually abused them when they were children. He maintained his innocence in Kirsten's case, but was convicted of kidnapping and killing her. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He initially attempted suicide in 2015 by slashing his wrists, but was unsuccessful in doing so. On January 14, 2019, Palma was strangled to death by his cellmate. His death has stalled the investigation since investigators hoped he would give them the location of Kirsten's body. Investigators searched his home and backyard for any sign of Kirsten, but there was no trace of her there. Her mother has asked investigators to search a lake that Palma previously worked at for any signs of her missing daughter. It's unclear if this location has been searched. At the time of her disappearance, Kirsten resides with her family in the 1100 block of Jet Drive. Her body hasn't been recovered, but foul play is suspected.